It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
The sea of insanity continues to rise. The Anthropocene epoch, i.e., the age of man. The corner we collectively find ourselves in is dark indeed. If you have to be persuaded, reminded, pressured, lied to, incentivized, forced, bullied, socially shamed, guilt-tripped, threatened, punished, and criminalized, if all of this is considered necessary to gain your compliance, you can absolutely be certain that what is being promoted is not in your best interest. That's a quote from Ian Watson. This quote was brought to my attention by Komen. Thank you for doing so. How many times have we been told, quote, "It's safe and effective. Don't worry, go back to sleep." How's that going so far? This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the non-political, commercial-free Global Alert News Hour, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the world's largest and most visited source of credible data on the covert climate engineering operations. In this broadcast, breaking frontline reports on the most dire and immediate threats we collectively face. Time is running out. If you don't believe it, you will soon. Wait and see. What bottom line factor has so furiously fueled and thus radically accelerated controller desperation? Unfolding biosphere collapse, which has and is occurring far faster than global power structures were prepared for. The collapse of Earth's life support systems, being further fueled by the ongoing climate intervention operations, has beat the controllers to the intersection, so to speak. More on that later in this broadcast. Back to what's unfolding on the front lines. From the UK Guardian and other sources, this headline: why most people who now die with COVID in England have had a vaccination. The UK Guardian report then states this: don't think of this as a bad sign. Stop and ponder that headline in the commentary I just covered from The Guardian. Black is white, up is down, day is night. And there's this from NBC News: 8 dead, dozens infected with COVID-19 due to outbreak at Connecticut nursing home. This question: what didn't the NBC headline clearly state? The following exact quote was buried in the NBC report. Here it is. Of the 89 total infections, 87 people were fully vaccinated. From RT TV and other international sources, this from last week: most vaccinated place on earth cancels Christmas. From that report, amid a surge in COVID-19 cases, Gibraltar has canceled official Christmas events and, quote, strongly discouraged people from hosting private gatherings for at least 4 weeks. And for the record, the report states Gibraltar's entire eligible population is vaccinated. More headlines, same theme. From multiple international sources, this: Germany plans tighter restrictions as infections reach record highs. And there's this: 93% vaccinated Ireland has gone back into, quote, partial lockdown, including a midnight curfew. Here's another from the UK Guardian: Austria to put millions of unvaccinated people in COVID lockdown. That's already implemented now. From multiple sources, this headline from last week: days into lockdown for the unvaccinated, Austria COVID cases hit record high. That's interesting, isn't it? Or should I say alarming? Here's another from the UK Independent: Czech Republic imposes lockdown on unvaccinated citizens, following suit to Austria. The Salem witch hunts are back, and it will get far worse fast. The deepest form of societal divide and conquer. Let's take a moment to ponder the following perspective from Sun Tzu, who said, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. End quote. How well so many in the human race have been programmed to not objectively investigate, to not feel a sense of responsibility to the whole, to not get involved, to not do their part, and above all, to not believe any and all unwanted, scary, and alarming news, no matter how much verifiable data there is to back up such news. Does ramming one's head in the sand work? No. If you're standing in the middle of a busy freeway, are you better off turning your back to traffic or facing it? The vast majority, even now, have absolutely no idea of what's unfolding and accelerating by the day, of what's nearly upon us. Power structures, via the use of their total media control, their total control of the official narratives, are doing their best to keep the public oblivious to the wider horizon until the last possible moment, the moment of impact, i.e., total collapse on countless fronts. Deception goes far deeper than the lies we're being fed. It's what populations aren't being told. In regard to the planet's collapsing life support systems, consider that each falling domino knocks over 10 more dominoes, each with their own chain of successive falling dominoes, and so on. Chaos, carnage, and total collapse on countless fronts is coming and close. Count on it. On that note, and on this theme, consider this new headline from scientificamerican.com. Deadly fungi are the newest emerging microbe threat all over the world. Question: how is this new threat interwoven with CV-19? Stay tuned. Let's cover some headlines. And no, the headlines to be covered on this bad news broadcast won't include the latest mainstream media docudrama trials that are specifically scripted to further distract, divide, and polarize populations. Let's start with this. Listen carefully to the following very revealing exchange between U.S. Senator Rand Paul and Dr. Anthony Fauci. Listen to their voices, their tones. Consider who seems to be telling the truth and who seems to be extremely evasive. Before starting the audio, for those that are not familiar with the gain of function term in virology, it means engineering a virus so that it can make the jump to humans. Consider that point as we listen in. Again, an exchange at a U.S. Senate hearing between U.S. Senator Rand Paul and Dr. Anthony Fauci. Here it is.
Fauci, I don't expect you today to admit that you approved of NIH funding for gain-of-function research in Wuhan, but your repeated denials have worn thin, and a majority of Americans, frankly, don't believe you. Even the NIH now admits that EcoHealth Alliance did perform experiments in Wuhan that created viruses not found in nature that actually did gain in lethality. The facts are clear. The NIH did fund gain-of-function research in Wuhan, despite your protestations. You can deny it all you want, but even the Chinese authors of the paper, in their paper, admit that viruses not found in nature were created, and yes, they gained in infectivity. Your persistent denials, though, are not simply a stain on your reputation, but are a clear and present danger to the country and to the world. As Professor Kevin Esfelt of MIT has written, gain-of-function research looks like a gamble that civilization can't afford to risk. And yet here we are again, with you steadfast in your denials. Why does it matter? Because gain-of-function research with laboratory-created viruses not found in nature could cause a pandemic even worse the next time. We're suffering today from one that has a mortality of approximately 1%. They're experimenting with viruses that have mortalities of between 15 and 50%. Yes, our civilization could be at risk from one of these viruses. Experiments that combine unknown viruses with known pandemic-causing viruses are incredibly risky. Experiments that combine unknown viruses with coronaviruses that have as much as 50% mortality could endanger civilization as we know it. And here you sit, unwilling to accept any responsibility for the current pandemic and unwilling to take any steps to prevent gain-of-function research from possibly unleashing an even more deadly virus. You mislead the public by saying that the published viruses could not be COVID. Well, exactly no one is alleging that. No one is alleging that the published viruses by the Chinese are COVID. What we are saying is that this was risky type of research, gain-of-function research. It was risky to share this with the Chinese, and that COVID may have been created from a not yet revealed virus. We don't anticipate the Chinese are going to reveal the virus if it came from their lab. You know that, but you continue to mislead. You continue to support NIH money going to Wuhan. You continue to say you trust the Chinese scientist. You appear to have learned nothing from this pandemic. Will you today finally take some responsibility for funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator, with all due respect, I disagree with so many of the things that you've said. First of all, gain of function is a very nebulous term. We have spent, not us, but outside bodies, a considerable amount of effort to give a more precise definition to the type of research that is of concern that might lead to a dangerous situation. You are aware of that. That is called P3CO.
We're aware that you deleted gain of function from the NIH website.
Well, I can get back to that in a moment if we have time.
Question: does changing the definition of this type of research eliminate culpability? You decide. Fauci continues.
But let's get back to the operating framework and guide rails of which we operate under. And you have ignored them. The guidelines are very, very clear that you have to be dealing with a pathogen that clearly is shown and very likely to be highly transmissible in an uncontrollable way in humans and to have a high degree of morbidity and mortality, and that you do experiments to enhance that, hence the word EPPP, enhanced pathogens of pandemic.
So when EcoHealth Alliance took the virus, SHC014, and combined it with WIV1 and caused a recombinant virus that doesn't exist in nature, and it made mice sicker, mice that had humanized cells, you're saying that that's not gain-of-function research?
According to the framework and guidelines.
So what you're doing is defining away gain of function. No. You're simply saying it doesn't exist because you changed the definition on the NIH website. This is terrible, and you're completely trying to escape the idea that we should do something about trying to prevent a pandemic from leaking from a lab. There's the preponderance of evidence now points towards this coming from the lab, and what you've done is change the definition on your website to try to cover your ass, basically. That's what you've done. You've changed the website to try to have a new definition that doesn't include the risky research that's going on. Until you admit that it's risky, we're not going to get anywhere. You have to admit that this research was risky. The NIH has now rebuked them. Your own agency has rebuked them. But the thing is you're still unwilling to admit that they gained in function when they say they became sicker. They gained in lethality. It's a new virus. That's not gain of function?
According to the definition that is currently operable, Senator, let's make it clear for the people who are listening. The current definition was done over a 2 to 3 year period by outside bodies, including the NSABB, 2 conferences by the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine on December 2014, March 2016. We commissioned external risk-benefit assessment, and then on January of 2017, the Office of Science and Technology Policy of the White House issued the current policy.
And coincidentally,
I have not changed
the definition
any
appeared
definition.
On the same day the NIH said that yes, there was a gain of function in Wuhan, the same day the definition appeared, the new definition, to try to define away what's going on in Wuhan. Until you accept it, until you accept responsibility, we're not going to get anywhere close to trying to prevent another lab leak of this dangerous sort of experiment. You won't admit that it's dangerous, and for that lack of judgment, I think it's time that you resign.
Thank you, Senator Paul, and I would like to give the time to Dr. Fauci.
Yeah, well, there were so many things that are egregious misrepresentation here, Madam Chair, that I don't think I'd be able to refute all of them, but just a couple of them for the listeners to hear for. You have said that I'm unwilling to take any responsibility for the current pandemic. I have no responsibility for the current pandemic. The current pandemic, okay? Number 2, you said the overwhelming amount of evidence indicates that's a lab leak. I believe most card-carrying phylogenists and molecular virologists would disagree with you that it's much more likely, even though we leave open all possibilities, it's much more likely that this was a natural occurrence.
Much more likely a natural occurrence, Fauci claims. Let's rewind to November 12th, 2015, published in the science peer-reviewed publication source nature.com. This headline. This is the headline report of the science study that was published. Engineered bat virus stirs debate over risky research. From this journal, Nature publicized science report. An experiment that created a hybrid version of a bat coronavirus, one related to the virus that causes SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, has triggered renewed debate over whether engineering lab variants of viruses with possible pandemic potential is worth the risk. That's the tip of that report, but you get the idea. Again, that is a peer-reviewed science study, Journal Nature, November 12th, 2015. And let's not forget, in 2017, January of 2017, I believe, Anthony Fauci, on film, on the record, at a podium, stating, quote, "There will be a surprise pandemic during this presidency." How did you know, Dr. Fauci? Let's catch a few more key moments between this exchange with Senator Rand Paul and Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Third, you say we can
Tested 80,000 animals and no animals have been found with COVID.
Senator Paul, the time is set for.
And third, you made a statement just a moment ago that's completely incorrect, where you say we continue to support research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You approved it in August of last year.
No, your statement says, quote, I wrote it down as you were writing. You continue to support research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You were in committee a month ago and said you still trust the Chinese scientists and you still support the research over there. You said it a month ago in committee.
Paul, I have allowed Dr. Fauci to respond. You've had your time. I'm going to give him.
If he's going to be dishonest, he ought to be challenged.
Senator Paul, we will allow Dr. Fauci to respond after you've given accusations like that. Dr. Fauci.
Well, I don't have any more to say except to say that, as usual, and I have a great deal of respect for this body of the Senate, and it makes me very uncomfortable to have to say something, but he is egregiously incorrect in what he says. Thank you.
History will figure that out on its own.
We will turn to Senator Hassan. Thank you.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans. Right. You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. You get one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among animals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
I'll stop there, and I'll leave it to the listener to decide who is telling the truth in that exchange and who wasn't. If you want to know more about who Dr. Fauci really is, get Robert F. Kennedy's new book release titled The Real Anthony Fauci. Big Pharma is certainly making billions off the CV-19 scenario. Is that the fundamental factor in the equation? No. Biosphere collapse is the bottom line that is fueling the inferno of insanity that we are all now entangled in. Next headline from multiple international sources, including RTTV USA. Release of U.S. vaccine data, quote, may take till 2076. That's a bit of a red flag there, wouldn't you say? Sounds like the ongoing saga of the JFK assassination files. From this international report, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, may take 55 years to release all the documents it used to declare Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine safe, a group of doctors and professionals claim. The FDA approved Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for people aged 16 and over in August, and last month extended its emergency use authorization to children as young as 5. This week, the FDA regulators are expected to permit booster doses of Pfizer's product for adults aged 18 and over. When a group of doctors and professors and journalists from the organization Public Health and Medical Professionals for Transparency submitted Freedom of Information Act, that's a FOIA, that's a request for the documents the FDA used to issue the authorization in August, and they say they were ignored. The group filed a lawsuit this week demanding the FDA administrators sit down with them and schedule the release of these documents. With more than 329,000 pages of data to be released, the group argued that scheduling a meeting was necessary. Otherwise, if the FDA were to process these documents at the pace that's typical for the Freedom of Information Act request, it would release just 500 pages per month. Lawyer Aaron Siri, representing the group, stated that FDA explicitly asked the court for 55 years to release the documents. As a comparison, it took the FDA precisely 108 days from when Pfizer started producing the records for licensing to when the FDA licensed the Pfizer vaccine. So let's compare these timeframes. While the FDA can conduct an intense review of Pfizer's documents in only 108 days, it now asks for over 20,000 days to make these documents available to the public. What's wrong with this picture? You decide. Next headline from numerous international sources, including, again, RTTV. Unvaccinated will have, quote, miserable, very lonely life, end quote. Top Australian doc warns. The head of the Australian Medical Association in Queensland has issued a dark warning to those who refuse the COVID vaccination, saying they will not only face fines and fraud charges, but will be separated from the rest of society. Listen carefully, and you can hear the head of the Australian Medical Association in Queensland state everything I just covered in his own words. Here it is.
Oh, they're crazy not to get vaccinated. Life will be miserable without being vaccinated. You won't be able to get any, you won't be able to hide, you won't be able to get a doctor to sign off that you got an exclusion, because there's quite set rules on that, and doctors will be audited to see every one of their exclusions will be looked at very carefully. They'll get fined, they can get struck off. The patients who tell lies can be charged with fraud. There's a whole pile of issues, whole pile of problems if you try and get around the system. It's going to be very hard to maintain your employment if you're not vaccinated. You won't be able to go anywhere for any entertainment. So by all means, get vaccinated. You've got another week where you can get double vaccinated before the 15th, the 17th of December, when it's definitely coming in. And there'll be proof that you've been vaccinated, firm proof. You'll be asked to show going into most venues. So get vaccinated, otherwise you're going to have a very, very lonely life, and you're not going to be able to maintain your employment.
Yeah.
There you have it from the land down under. Roll up your sleeve, do what you're told, or else. But it seems some have finally had enough. From CBS News and numerous other mainstream sources, OSHA is suspending enforcement of the government's new employer vaccine rule. The Labor Department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration said it is suspending its enforcement of the Biden administration's new rules. But certainly the powers that be will soon push back. They won't stop. They're committed to their mission. What a circus of insanity it all is. What is most directly fueling total power structure desperation, along with the runaway societal insanity and unraveling? Unfolding and accelerating biosphere collapse. That's the bottom line behind it all. Earlier in this broadcast, we heard Dr. Anthony Fauci attempting to redefine reality in order to suit his own objectives. Do so-called climate scientists do the same? Short answer, yes. Changing definitions to suit their own ends. Listen carefully to this additional short audio clip taken from a live on-air radio debate on climate engineering. It was aired on New York's WBAI radio. The debate was between myself and Dr. Douglas McMartin, who represents Cornell University, MIT, Carnegie Science, and Caltech. McMartin, like Fauci, again, also attempted to deny reality because reality didn't fit his definition of what reality should be, at least in his mind. Here's the clip.
I would want Dane to respond to this specifically. So, Dane, as you heard, Professor McMartin does not believe that it's going on because we do not have the aircraft and the technology to release the necessary aerosols to reflect the sunlight back into space. What are your thoughts on that?
So, Mr. McMartin, I'm understanding you to say that we don't have aircraft that can fly into the stratosphere. Is that correct?
We don't have aircraft that can fly into the stratosphere and deliver a useful payload.
How high is the stratosphere? Where does it start?
So I should be a little more precise. If you wanted to actually reflect light, the reason that we talk about putting things in the stratosphere is that we're really interested in
no, that's not my
part
question.
Of the atmosphere.
Right. I asked a question. I don't want to use my time on that.
Let me finish.
How high is the stratosphere? Let me fill in that blank because we have scientific data to show that the stratosphere in the polar regions especially is as low as 23,000 feet. We have PC-135s that at that altitude can carry 100 tons of material. Are you denying that 100 tons of material wouldn't affect the climate? And again, if you're claiming that aircraft can't fly into the stratosphere, even at the mid-latitudes, a stratospheric altitude can start at 33,000 feet. All forms of jet aircraft can reach those altitudes. So I don't think what you're saying holds any water, Doug.
Dane, if you allowed me to finish my sentence,
it was my turn to talk, and I simply asked you one question. So go ahead.
So the answer to your question is that you need to get material up to at least 60 to 70,000 feet.
Okay, you're changing. You said into the stratosphere, and what you stated was not mathematically correct. So now you're actually picking an altitude that is not just the start of the stratosphere, but much higher. So again, what you stated initially, Doug, was we couldn't do anything. You knew nothing was happening with climate engineering because we didn't have the capability to reach the stratosphere, and I'm saying that is simply not true.
So let me refine what I originally said. The reason that we talk about the stratosphere is because we need air mass that is sufficiently stable that what we put there actually stays there for a considerable length of time. And to do that, quite frankly, even 60,000 feet is pretty marginal. You really want to be up at 70,000 feet or higher. And we do not...
Whatever the desired parameters are, what does that have to do with the factual data that we have to show that the programs are in fact ongoing, from film footage, lab testing, Senate documents, presidential documents? I could go on and on. Whatever your desired parameters are for an experiment, that doesn't change the fact that the experiment is ongoing.
So we can go through all of that if you want and refute them all one by one, but the bottom line is if you want to make a meaningful difference to the temperature of the climate, you have to get your material very high into the atmosphere. And if you cannot get your material high into the atmosphere, you can't be doing geoengineering.
And you're saying...
For that matter, if you said maybe Doug doesn't know all of the aircraft that exist, well, if you did put the material at 60,000 feet, we'd be able to see it, and you can't.
Well, nobody's talking about 60,000 feet, Doug. What we're here to talk about is, has climate engineering long since been deployed? And the data says absolutely yes. So whatever you want to argue about what you would wish the parameters were or what was being followed for these experiments, it doesn't change the fact that the experiments are ongoing, and the data makes that irrefutable. So we're not here to argue semantics that because you have a particular definition of what stratospheric aerosol geoengineering that doesn't fit the reality that we see on the ground, therefore it's not happening. That doesn't really hold water, Doug. That's just your particular opinion of what should fit under that definition.
Though I've previously covered part of my debate with Dr. McMartin on this broadcast, the Fauci-McMartin parallel of definition changing as a means of denial was important to hear and compare. If you want to hear the full debate between myself and Dr. Douglas McMartin, search Debating the Geoengineering Reality, Dane Wigington and Caltech scientist Douglas McMartin. On that note, also from the land down under, from Climate Action Australia, this new headline report: IPCC scientist survey shows most expect climate catastrophe soon. Scientists are, quote, terrified, the headline states. IPCC's largest scientific panel on any subject in human history. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. From that report, a new Nature survey shows a majority of the world's leading climate scientists expect, quote, catastrophic impacts in their lifetimes driven by rising greenhouse gas emissions. But of course, not surprisingly, there is no mention whatsoever of the climate intervention operations in the equation. And next, if these so-called climate scientists are terrified that, quote, catastrophic impacts will happen in their lifetime, how fearful will they be when they are soon, very soon, forced to face the fact that abrupt climate collapse is here, now? Mathematically speaking, if the human race remains on the current course, we have a few years at best. Stay tuned for more on that subject later in this broadcast. And for the record, there can be no legitimate discussion about the climate or the state of the climate without first and foremost acknowledging the climate engineering elephant in the equation. Next headline from Yahoo News and other sources. Infrastructure bill is, quote, big oil business as usual, end quote, says U.S. Congressman in Glasgow. That's at the COP26 climate conference circus of deception. From the UK Guardian, it's a fairy tale that world governments will fix climate crisis. It's up to us. So says Bill McKibben. Bill McKibben from 350.org, the so-called environmentalist group that refuses to acknowledge climate engineering, and we know because our attorneys at geoengineeringwatch.org spoke with their attorneys, from the so-called environmental group that receives funding from who? The Rockefeller Foundation. If you think that such individuals are going to tell the truth, think again. They know exactly how long their leash is. A final consideration and question regarding the COP26 Smoke and Mirrors Carnival. Given the fact that governments around the world are, in essence, nothing less than state-sponsored crime syndicates, i.e. criminal cabals, what do we expect from them? What should we expect from them in regard to what they are willing to do to save themselves? The planet's life support systems are imploding from the weight of the human race. The radical uptick in what mainstream media calls immigration problems is more accurately categorized as the movement of environmental and societal collapse refugees, and it will get rapidly and radically worse. So, again, this question, what actions should we expect from the controllers in regard to immediately reducing this burden on the planet from a human paradigm that the controllers themselves have done everything to orchestrate? You decide. More breaking bad news reports in a moment. First, my deepest gratitude to each and every individual that's doing their best to stay informed, to wake others with credible data from a credible source, and in doing so, helping to turn the tide of insanity. Thank you for making your voices heard in this most critical effort to sound the alarm. It's our collective actions that can yet make a difference. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the Global Alert News Hour, episode number 328, November 20th, 2021. This is the bad news broadcast, but it's critical information that covers the issues we must collectively face if we're to have any chance of changing course. This non-political, commercial-free frontline news broadcast is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org and paid for by Geoengineeringwatch.org. This news hour is broadcast on AM and FM stations in Northern California, Washington State, on the East Coast, Alabama, San Antonio, Texas, Tampa, Florida, San Francisco, Sacramento, San Diego, Portland, Oregon, Denver, Colorado, and Columbus, Ohio. I want to express my deepest gratitude to all those that have helped Geoengineeringwatch.org expand our voice to so many major locations. Those who have helped in this effort know who they are. Recordings of the weekly Global Alert News broadcast can be found at Geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent top stories and radio sections. The latest Geoengineeringwatch.org awareness-raising materials can be ordered from our homepage for our approximate cost of producing and shipping. Our color-glossy flyers and 20-page fact and photo summary booklets are packed with shocking satellite images, documents, patents, photos of the retrofit spray nozzles mounted on climate engineering aircraft, and much, much more. Again, our only goal is to sound the alarm as effectively and efficiently as possible. On that note, the recently completed Geoengineeringwatch.org documentary on climate engineering titled The Dimming conclusively proves climate engineering operations are ongoing. This groundbreaking documentary is now posted on the top center of the Geoengineeringwatch.org homepage. Please help us to overcome social media censorship and to expose the insanity in our skies by sharing the link to this groundbreaking documentary that fully exposes the ongoing climate engineering onslaught. By sharing the link for the documentary directly from the Geoengineeringwatch.org homepage through email, helps us to overcome the attempt of the controllers to censor the dimming documentary and the Geoengineeringwatch.org data contained on our website. A steadfast ally in the fight to expose and halt the climate engineering insanity is the GEMFAIR Group, GEMFAIRE. At every Gym Fair event, there's a geoengineeringwatch.org informational booth with free geoengineeringwatch.org printed materials. If you're there to pick up those materials, you can get into the event for free if you tell the Ticketmaster why you're there. There's a Gym Fair event this weekend, started yesterday, ends tomorrow at Hillsboro, Oregon, at the Westside Commons, formerly the Washington County Fairgrounds. On December 3rd through December 5th, Costa Mesa, California, at the Orange County Fair and Event Center. And December 10th through December 12th, Santa Barbara, California, at the Earl Warren Showgrounds. If you're near any of these events, please show up, show your support for Gym Fair and for exposing the insanity in our skies. Pick up the materials you need to help wake those around you to the climate intervention insanity. Moving on, as mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast from scientificamerican.com, deadly fungi are the newest emerging microbe threat all over the world. From that report, these pathogens already kill 1.6 million people every year, very conservative estimate, and we have few defenses against them. Tom Chiller is a physician and an epidemiologist, and in normal times, a branch chief at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. Dr. Chiller is in charge of the section that monitors health threats from fungi. Let's rewind back to June 2021. Conditions were unfolding that official sources and mainstream media were doing their best to hide. Hospitals near Los Angeles that were handling an onslaught of COVID were reporting a new problem. This is all from the Scientific American report. Some of their patients had developed additional infections with fungus called Candida auris. The state had gone on high alert. California. From the start of the CV-19 pandemic, the CDC branch chief, Tom Chiller, had felt uneasy about CV-19 possible intersection with fungal infections. The first COVID case reports published by Chinese scientists in international journals described patients as catastrophically ill and consigned to intensive care. The report states they were pharmaceutically paralyzed, plugged into ventilators, threaded with IV lines, loaded with drugs to suppress infection and inflammation. Those frantic interventions might save them from the virus, but immune-dampening drugs would disable their innate defenses, and broad-spectrum antibiotics would kill off beneficial bacteria that keep invading microbes in check. Patients would be left extraordinarily vulnerable to any and all pathogens that might be lurking nearby. This is word for word from scientificamerican.org. They continue. Tom Chiller and his colleagues began quietly reaching out to colleagues in the U.S. and Europe, asking for any warning signs that COVID was allowing deadly fungi a foothold. Accounts of infections trickled back from India, Italy, Colombia, Germany, Austria, Belgium, Ireland, and the Netherlands, and France. Now the same deadly fungi were surfacing in American patients as well. The first signs of a second epidemic layered on top of the viral pandemic. And it wasn't just C. auris. That's the fungi. Another deadly fungus called Aspergillus was starting to take a toll as well. This is going to be a widespread, everywhere event. That's a direct quote from CDC branch chief Tom Chiller. He then stated, "We don't think we're going to be able to contain this," end quote. The Scientific American report then continues with this. Fungi are surging beyond their former climate zones. They are long-lived and adapting to environments that would once have been inimical, learning new behaviors that lets them leap between species in novel ways. While executing those maneuvers, they are becoming more successful pathogens, threatening human health in ways and numbers they could not have achieved before. The report then states, "We have an enormous blind spot," says Arturo Casadevall, a physician and molecular microbiologist at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. He stated, "Walk into the street and ask people what they are afraid of, and they'll tell you that they're afraid of bacteria, they're afraid of viruses, but they don't fear dying of fungi," end quote. The Scientific American article then states this, "Ironically, it is our success that made us vulnerable. Fungi exploit damaged immune systems, but before the mid-20th century, people with impaired immunity didn't live very long. Since then, medicine has become proficient at keeping such people alive, even though their immune systems are compromised by illness or cancer treatment or age. It has also developed an array of therapies that deliberately suppress immunity to keep transplant recipients healthy and treat autoimmune disorders such as lupus, rheumatoid arthritis. So vast numbers of people are living now who are especially vulnerable to fungi." Now, While remembering and considering all the data that I just covered, let's add more puzzle pieces to the equation. The following are statements from a Geoengineeringwatch.org report titled, "Why Are They Spraying?" Answers from an insider. The following questions were answered by a Geoengineering Watch insider scientist now deceased. First question: where are the official sources that state that a certain number of people worldwide will sicken and possibly die as a result of the spraying, i.e. climate engineering aerosol particulate dispersions? In other words, this is the question still, what internal studies have been done on the health issues and who carried them out? Question mark. Insider answer: the World Health Organization carried out most of the studies. Other nations have carried out their own research on the matter. Some have said the ill effects will be minimal, along the lines of 1 million or so, while others have found the numbers to be far higher, 3 to 4 billion with a B. He continues, some of the organizations include the CDC and independent labs. We are dealing with a situation where the amount of contamination is estimated to be far higher than what would normally take place. The insider then states this: this is important to note. The only real history we have with barium, aluminum, titanium, etc. contamination is through factory workers, miners, etc., who receive far greater dosage of the material than what is to be experienced by the population under the shield. The accepted estimated casualties from the World Health Organization is 2 billion, again with a B, over the course of 6 decades. Again, we're talking about the effect of the atmospheric aerosol dispersions. The insider then states this: the majority will be either the elderly or those who are prone to respiratory problems. These numbers are based on the current estimates of the general health of the population, the average age, and the occurrence of respiratory problems as a health issue. The climate engineering insider then stated this: there have been attempts to incorporate the materials in jet fuel. However, the material binds with unburned jet fuel, water vapor, etc., and does not have the added buoyancy of the polymer threads. The end result is a spray that is less than half as effective and is more dangerous since it can lead to sulfates, acids, and other mixtures, which are even more lethal than the spray itself. Lastly, the insider suggests that we research how mold propagates, the conditions it needs to grow, and just how abundant it is in the atmosphere. So, in conclusion, given the on-the-record statements from CDC branch chief Tom Chiller, as reported in the Scientific American article, and given the statements from the climate engineering scientist insider, would it not seem reasonable and rational to consider what role overlapping fungal infections might be playing in all that's unfolding around the world, and what role climate engineering might be playing in all of it, given it's saturating the atmosphere with platforms on which fungal proliferation can accelerate exponentially? Should we believe official sources would alert populations to such complexities of the potential, again, overlapping mortality factors? Or, given what we already know about what we are routinely not being told by any official agency or their mainstream media propaganda pushers, wouldn't it be completely unlikely for the public to be told anything whatsoever about any of all that I just covered? Let's put a few more pieces of the puzzle together. From Greenpeace.org, oil companies are plowing money into fossil-fueled plastics production at a record rate. Question: how much of the ramped-up plastic and polymer fiber production is going to the climate engineers to be sprayed into our skies? Because it's part of the climate engineering patents. Polymer fibers to help keep the toxic heavy metals aloft in the atmosphere for longer. How much is going into our skies? You decide. Now this, from ucl.ac.uk. Fossil fuel air pollution responsible for 1 in 5 deaths worldwide. The report states an estimated 1 in 5 deaths, that's 18 to 21.5% every year, can be attributed to fossil fuel pollution, a figure much higher than previously thought, according to new research. Of course, the copious amounts of highly toxic climate engineering fallout is neither mentioned nor considered. But from this report, they state this: the study shows that more than 8 million people around the globe die each year as a result of breathing in air contaminated with particles from burning fuels like coal, petrol, diesel, which aggravate respiratory conditions like asthma and can lead to lung cancer, coronary heart disease, strokes, and early death. The research, led by Harvard University in collaboration with UCL, the University of Birmingham, and the University of Leicester, has been published in the journal Environmental Research. Final excerpt from this report. Quote, burning fossil fuels produces fine particles laden with toxins that are small enough to penetrate deep into the lungs. The risks of inhaling these particles, known as PM2.5, are well documented. Let's add more to that equation. What's far worse still? Particles in the nanometer range, from 20 to 80 nanometers, exactly like the particles that geoengineeringwatch.org found in our NOAA flying lab with top scientists in it, particles being dispersed from heavy aircraft at altitude, particles that match climate engineering patents exactly. So when we're talking about particles that small that aren't tested for by any official agency, no one tests for these particles by design. They are exponentially more toxic and more damaging than PM 2.5 particles, and no one is looking for them, and you can't find what you're told not to look for, can you? And we're sucking it up with every breath. Every single human test subject that geoengineeringwatch.org has tested or been involved with testing, hair, blood, and urine, everyone is packed with these elements. They are very bioavailable. The smaller the particle, the more toxic it is. And there's synergistic toxicity to consider, which I bring up again and again and again. Particles like aluminum, of course, are highly toxic in and of themselves. When you combine aluminum with mercury, for example, all of which is now combined in all of us, toxicity increases up to 10,000%, 100 times worse. It's a wonder any of us are still able to walk and talk. And consider this. When our respiratory systems are so constantly inflamed, we are far more vulnerable to any and every form of pathogen, including CV-19 and fungi. I'm almost out of time for this broadcast. I want to cover a bit more ground. From the UK Guardian last week, this headline: "It's time to shift from, quote, the war on terror to a war on climate change." No, to be sure, there is a war occurring in our sky. A war against all life on Earth. That's what climate intervention operations are. They are mathematically and statistically speaking the single greatest and most immediate threat we collectively face, short of nuclear cataclysm. And the whole of so-called academia continues to pretend that it's just a proposal, that we need to put jets in the sky and spray this toxic material, but what you're seeing, you're not really seeing. It's just your imagination, apparently. I'm asking anyone, everyone that's listening to this broadcast to search the climate engineering science terms: geoengineering, again, climate engineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, cloud albedo enhancement, and you will see described exactly what we see occurring in our skies. And let's put the so-called condensation trail narrative to rest once and for all. We have up-close film footage of jet aircraft, military tankers, and commercials with nozzles visible, retrofit mounted on the aircraft wing pylons, aimed into the exhaust jet stream, nozzles turning on and off. End of discussion. This is not condensation. Again, same materials listed in primary climate engineering patents showing up in lab tests from all over the globe. What will it take for the population to be willing to face reality, not just on this front, but many, many others? The climate engineers continue to fire hose moisture into the Pacific Northwest. As this moisture moves east, weather makers conduct massive cloud seeding operations utilizing patented chemical ice nucleating elements. The result: frozen precipitation is produced, i.e. engineered winter. In specific locations further east, the mainstream media climate engineering cover-up machine is put into action, and headlines of cold, cold, cold are pushed on populations, further feeding their confusion regarding the actual state of the global climate collapse. Exactly. A key part of the power structure agenda: divide and thus conquer populations while retaining their stranglehold on power and keeping business as usual until the last possible moment. And that moment now draws near, which is where the, quote, warp speed piece of the puzzle fits into the equation. Climate feedback loops, like the explosive release of formerly frozen methane hydrate deposits, more specifically in the Arctic, are at the core of the exponential equation that's unfolding. The scenario that will soon, very soon, determine our collective future. I'll cover more about this in a future broadcast. But the bottom line is this: where has the journey of the human race led us? The human race, taken as a whole, and at the direction of those in power, has conducted itself in the same manner as a cancer. In the geologic blink of an eye, our species has literally laid waste to our miracle planet that formerly thrived for unimaginably long spans of time. No more. I've recently been asked, have the last 20 plus years of my desperate attempts to sound the alarm been an attempt to save the cancer? No. Rather, I'm trying to make clear that the cancer must change its behavior, must become something other than a cancer, or our host, planet Earth will die, and we will die with her. Yes, those in power are what can only be described as evil to the core. But are not all those that actively or passively serve this core of power the same to one degree or another? Why are populations, again, taken as a whole, continuing to allow the controllers the right to decide who will remain, at least for a while, and who will not, i.e., most of us? In the words of Edmund Burke, which I've cited many times already, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. Again, I ask, who will stand and be counted? It's now or never. What will each of us choose to do in the time we've been given? As I stated in the closing scenes of the groundbreaking geoengineeringwatch.org documentary, The Dimming, any one of us could be the final grain of sand that triggers the landslide of human awakening. Is that not worth fighting for with every fiber of our being until our last breath? Stand with me, march with me, side by side. Let's make our voices heard effectively and efficiently. Sharing credible data from a credible source is key. Sow the seeds of awareness and move on. Unfolding circumstances will soon force all to face reality, like it or not. The universe, the Creator, knows where we are supposed to be and when we're supposed to be there. We, all of us, are here for a reason. It's not a random accident of fate. We must keep our compass heading no matter what challenges we face. Giving up is not an option. Every day counts in this all-important battle to turn the tide. Face to the wind, we march on. Until next week, stay safe, stay strong. This is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.